Thank you, Marion. Um, and a complicated Rosh it is too. The story of Nadav and Abihu, the two elder sons of Aaron, who died on this it was supposed to be, it was a national day of celebration. And here in the middle of celebrating the sanctification of the Mishkan, we have this deep grief. It is something that the rabbis still today argue about and look for a deeper meaning, because we know that in Judaism, reading the Torah, there is always many, many layers of meaning, and we choose the one that seems to make the most sense, that talks to our hearts, that talks to our connection with Hashem. For example, for me, I don't believe that Hashem is a God that would do this. For example, as I said, in the Haftarah, it was an accident. The cart fell, and this man got crushed. Now, many attribute that to God, sure, as many would blame God for the Holocaust. I cannot do that. And you've heard me say this many times, but it's so important. If a child runs in front of a car that a drunk person is driving and the child gets killed, do we blame Hashem? No. Our religion is a religion of laws. We should have done better controlling the laws of people who drive cars, if it's possible to find everyone. So let's see what many of the different rabbis have said. A sense of mourning fell over the camp and the people. And many people, there have been so many different interpretations. And what I realize now, and particularly in this era of this great tragedy that fell on us too unexpectedly, the plague and the war, people use the tragedy under the guise, as we heard last night, of wanting to do good for their people, and they use that to destroy and hurt others. And so also with the interpretation by the rabbis of this. So many of the sages said, they were just waiting for Moses and Aaron to die because they wanted to usurp their authority. They were jealous, maybe. Others said it was because they never married, they didn't respect women enough. Woo! Others say that they were intoxicated. We will never know the true reason why these people died from a foreign, strange fire that had nothing to do with the normal rituals that God had instructed Moses to instruct the priests to do. So, what are we to make of this? They acted, we could say, spontaneously, but other people have acted spontaneously too, and they weren't killed, they didn't drop dead. Moses acted spontaneously when he broke the tablets. When he came down the mountain for the first time, he was so angry because he saw the people worshipping a golden calf. He broke them to show them what a sin they had done. And as you know, he later returned. So David, even in the part we read now, he did something unexpectedly after the 3 months when they brought this magnificent ark down from the house that had been blessed by God after 3 months, which was also, I presume, a mourning period for the man who'd been crushed and died. He sang and danced beside the ark, something that wasn't ever done before. No one rebuked him, by the way, certainly not Hashem, and certainly not no tragedy, except his own wife. So what is the big difference? All right. There are many differences that have been spoken about, but one that hasn't been put forward much and has been emphasized by the late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory is that perhaps this is a lesson to teach us that there are limits in life. There is an order to our universe, and you must respect it. In other words, what this great rabbi is teaching us is that because there was an order that Hashem through Moses had set in to the sacrificial offerings, which really were for food and atonement, you couldn't just go and break that order. Just the way in which today we have totally broken the order of the natural world. There's no respect for it. There's no limitations anymore. We've over farmed certain areas. We've desecrated forests. We've abused and overhunted animals. And this is a limit. And if you look at Torah, you'll see there is a law. Every 7 years, let the earth lie fallow. On a Saturday, no one may work, not even your animals. The earth has to rest. So it is when you abuse these laws and the laws of the natural order of the universe, this is what this symbolizes. You and I'll never really know what happened, how this strange fire came forth. What we do know is they went against the order that had been imposed. And remember, this is all leading up to us, so that thousands of years and generations later, we can read the Torah and respect law and respect order. This is what the sons didn't do. And I think that is so important. And one other thing about this, yes, they didn't consult with Moshe. He was a prophet. They should have. They were priests in the making. They were learning. But this must show us that there is a limit to everything. They even mention the great sages, the Garden of Eden. Why would God, who knew it would be a temptation, or this great energy, or this wonderful parable, tell us about 2 trees being planted, one for good, and one for the knowledge that they were not allowed to eat from. They were allowed to eat everything else in the Garden of Eden. They had everything, but this one tree was forbidden. Why? Because again, this is teaching us there is a limit. There is not just freedom of words, freedom of action, freedom of abuse. There is a limit. There is order in the universe. And that was what the parable of the Garden of Eden was telling us, that there are limits. There are certain things you cannot eat. There are certain words you cannot say. There are certain actions you cannot do. And just to show you how the laws of Torah have to be respected, the limitations, and that it is such a conundrum. It's so difficult for us to understand. For example, we have to respect the freedom of speech. That's in our Torah. At the same time, there is a limit. When that freedom of speech goes beyond the good of the people, and it leads to hatred and violence and death and destruction, it has to be stopped. Now, who is to prove when that limit has been overreached? In place of the laws of Torah in modern society, we have our judicial system. And I just want to refer and conclude this one section of my drosha on the recent case of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, who had a case in the courts for 16 years. Since 13 or 16, I stand to be corrected, since Bongani Museku who instigated an entire stadium of people with his words defending the Palestinian issue. And there is an issue to be defended. They've got a right to land. But he went beyond that issue and utilized this issue to instigate a hatred against people in South Africa, Jews, Zionists like myself, presume most of you who love Israel. And he went on to say, and I'm paraphrasing this, that anyone who was a Zionist who lived in this country should get out, or he'll make sure that they come and see that they no longer live here. That took years, 13 to 16 years, to go from each court to the other. And Baruch Hashem, just a couple of months ago, our constitutional court actually found that he'd passed the limits of free speech and he'd gone into hatred. So thus, everything in life, there are limits. And basically, I too think that this is what this tragedy is telling us. And yet, in all our greatest moments of celebration of life, there's tragedy. We think of the loved ones we've lost in our Kaddish. And here, living in this pandemic, and with this horrific war, in our joy of Shabbat, and thanking God, we think of what mankind has done to mankind by not observing our laws and passing those limits. You see, when those two sons went with their strange fire, what was their motive? It wasn't to help the people. Their sacrifices had already been atoned for and done. It had no purpose but to make themselves stand out and be different. Every other thing that I mentioned, King David smashing the tablets, had a purpose. It was to teach the people a lesson. Dancing beside the ark at a later stage in the Haftorah with joy. It broke the rules, but it had a purpose. It was to show how joyous it was to be with people worshiping Hashem. So I think that's a very important lesson. However, there is one other aspect I must share with you, because I think we as progressive Jews must discuss things as they are. There have been certain people, rabbis, maybe in the past, years ago, who said, you see, you can't change the law. They're those progressive Jews. They're trying to change the law. They just the way the sons of Aaron did. How have we changed the law? And I want to challenge. And if you look at the World Union, our Rabbi Rick Jacobs challenges that, and he's quite right too. And he says, yes, we have changed some of the rituals, exactly as David did when he danced and sang with joy. But what rituals have we changed? And this criticism is still amongst those people, of course, of the ultra-Orthodox, who cannot understand that they have to listen, as Moses did to Aaron when he said, no, I'm not going to eat today. My heart is broken, even if that is the order. His reason was a good one. He didn't want the people to see he could still eat when he was suffering the loss of his sons. And also here, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who is the head of our movement, points out the following. We have changed things, certainly. What have we changed? We've changed bringing women. We've added the names of Rebecca, Leah, Rachel, etc. to Jacob and the patriarchs. That was only for good. It was to make women feel good. We have changed the entire scenario for the LGBT community They are part of our service. They become rabbis. We've did this years ago already. What was the motive? For the compassion to make other people feel that God had created them in perfection, as they were, and to be needed. I think this is a very important point. So this innovation must never be confused with not respecting the laws, because this innovation led to the good of people. By not respecting the laws, to respect the humanity, the sanctity of life, the words of Putin, as I mentioned last night, has led to the death and destruction of thousands. Please God, it'll stop. In fact, I think it's, please God, it's not yet 1,000, but please God, it will stop. Exactly as the previous dictator, Hitler, led to the destruction not only of 6 million Jews, but 20 million further people. So let us think very carefully as I conclude. Judaism is not a religion of blind faith. No one gives a drosha, not even the greatest rabbi, that is just a sermon to say you've got to do this and that. It is to teach us to think, to question our own words, our own actions to each other. Can we be more compassionate? Can we be kinder? Will our words and actions lead to the good of the others around us, in our congregation, in our committee, in our community, in our business, in the wider society? It is an incredible religion based on laws, universal laws of the order of this world. We have to understand, we have to respect those laws, be it the laws but how we treat each other, be it the laws of how we treat the world, and be it the laws of how we treat animals and nature. Because this pandemic that Baruch Hashem, we seem more or less to be able to handle and maybe even overcome, we now have to see humanity, which is rising in great force against this dictator and his evil ways. Shabbat Shalom.